Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Girls Got Game, to our brand new season. We're super excited. I can't believe we're already on season 5. And on that note, we're also trying something quite different this season. We're going to be incorporating different interviews into our show just to showcase the voices of other people. We're going to have different people talk about female sports. What are your guys' favorite sports moments from over the break? I know we had quite a long break, I think 2 months since we last did the show. So what sports did you guys watch? What was your favorite female sports moments from those past 2 months?
Yeah, I'll start it off with probably the most recent thing to happen in women's sports. It was Osaka winning the Australian Open. And that was super exciting for me just because she's so humble and she's so amazing, and the fact that when she beat Serena Williams, I find that this tournament especially was really exciting. Not only did you have the build up from the 2 weeks that all the athletes had to quarantine in their hotel rooms, that was super controversial, to then having this amazing competition. So anyways, I'm super happy for her. It's her 4th Grand Slam, and I can't wait to see what happens next.
I honestly was expecting, I think, Serena to win more, but I'm so happy for Naomi Osaka. I mean, she's amazing. But yeah, Ella, do you want to go next?
Yeah, my favorite event that I probably watched, and it's not specific for women, but it was just super fun to see, to no surprise, was there's a new snowboarding event called Natural Selection, which was so cool because it's something that's never been done before, and instead of having a groomed hill or anything, it was literally that country, and it was just awesome to see all the women out there riding just as hard as the men were. And something about being out in the middle of the trees on the mountain is 10 times scarier than going off a jump that's 10 stories high. So it was really fun to watch, and I'm excited for next year already.
Yeah, that's amazing, and I love the variety of different sports moments we have. I feel like everyone has a different one. Kennedy, what's yours?
I really enjoyed the broadcast of the NWHL playoffs and their mini season, unfortunately before it got shut down or suspended, because of COVID, but I think it was really nice to actually be able to watch that hockey, and it was really enjoyable. It was really good hockey, and I'm happy that these women are finally getting a platform to showcase what they can do.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's been a great couple months for women's hockey too. Obviously there's been some drama as well, but I think overall it's been good. Yeah, Emma?
Okay, so my favorite sports moment, it wasn't a professional one, but I kind of tried snowboarding
for the first time. Oh my god, no way!
But since all the ski places are closed, I literally did it down a tiny hill in my area. But yeah, it was super fun, and I didn't die. I mean, the hill was tiny, but yeah, it was a lot more fun than I thought.
That's awesome. Well, I guess my turn, and my favorite sports moment happened yesterday when the rhythmic gymnastics Grand Prix started in Moscow, which is the first live rhythmic gymnastics competition that happened since last spring. So I was super excited. Anyone who's interested, it's on today as well, so watch it. But yeah, I think that we all had some great sports moments, whether we did the sport or we watched the sport. But yeah, that's awesome. I think now we're going to throw to our interview, very first Girls Got Game interview of the season, and we're going to have a lot more interviews. But for today, we have an interview with the digital media producer of the Burlington Barradcudas girls hockey team, Jerred Bapty. I think it's going to be very interesting to hear kind of a male's perspective on women's hockey, because I think this is our first male that we are having on the show, and I think it's really important to hear that perspective as well. So let's take a listen. Okay, welcome to Girls Got Game, first interview of the season, and today joining us we have Jerred Bapty, who's the digital media producer for the Burlington Barracudas Girls Hockey Club. Jerred, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Wow, first interview of the season. I put a suit on, but I feel like I might have needed to be a little more, I don't know, something, but thank you.
It's great to have you. So we really wanted to have you on the show because you're a huge advocate for women's hockey, women's sports in general, which is what our whole show is about. So that's amazing. So as I mentioned, you work for a girls hockey team, the Burlington Barracudas. So what made you get into women's hockey, and what made you want to work for a women's hockey team?
When I was at the University of Windsor a little while ago, I was dating a girl who was also a referee, and she got me into officiating, but primarily officiated girls hockey. And that's partly because, funny enough, you actually get paid slightly more to officiate women's hockey than men's hockey.
Really? Oh, yeah. Wow. Never would have thought.
It's not by much, but it's enough of a difference that you go, okay, I'd rather referee girls Bantam House League than boys Bantam House League, because I can get $20 for a girls House League game instead of $18 for a boys House League game.
Do you know why that is? Why reffing women's team pays more?
Well, it's all to do with the different associations. Like some local associations will pay more or less. There's multiple men's officiating, like there's Alliance Hockey and the OMHA, the Ontario Men's Hockey Association, whereas for women it's just the Ontario Women's Hockey Association.
Right.
So I don't know if that financially has to do with anything like that. I don't know the specifics, but all I know is that I've refereed both. It's more enjoyable to referee women's hockey, and it is more profitable to referee women's hockey. So that's how I got started in women's hockey. And then when I had been officiating a game at a rink called Forest Glade Arena in Windsor. And that's the rink where the Southwest Wildcats play, which is the junior team, the PWHL team based in Windsor. And my girlfriend was going to, I think she was either refereeing that game or she was lining that game, but her brother was the timekeeper for the team. And so I sauntered over there to say hi to her brother, and he was like, oh, by the way, nobody's doing the announcements. Like, the manager's not here. She normally does the announcements. So, and I was like, well, are you guys going to do them? No, right? The brother and so the timekeeper and the scorekeeper were like, we're not touching this thing, the microphone, right? And I was like, okay, I'll do it. And then it just kind of sprung from there. But I didn't really know much of anything about women's hockey prior to that point in my life. That's evolved since then, because, I mean, truly, that was 2014. But it really wasn't that long ago. I think there's been strides made, but there's still a lot to be done because there's just not the same kind of awareness, right? Boys don't get taught about the existence of girls hockey. It's almost like it gets shown to them or they find it themselves. At least that was my experience.
Wow, that's really interesting how you kind of would say accidentally got into it and
kind of stumbled into it. Yeah.
Yeah, and now it led to basically you having a career in it. But that's really interesting. But as I mentioned, and as everyone knows, obviously men's hockey is way more popular than women's hockey in general. We have the NHL, not compared to the NWHL or anything else. Like, they're making way more money. They're way more popular, all this stuff. Why do you think that is? Why do you think women's hockey is so much less popular, so significantly less popular than men's hockey, and so underrepresented?
Well, the growth of women's hockey is a lot more recent, right? Men's hockey has been around since, the late 1800s. And that's not to say that women's hockey hasn't been around for that long, but it hasn't been accepted for that long, right? I mean, it took some time for women to get the right to vote, let alone to then play hockey. So there's that whole side of things where women have become much more accepted in society over the course of a couple hundred years. But in sport, there's there's this idea that women doing anything just isn't as exciting as men doing anything athletic. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things going against it, is that this idea of, oh, well, it's not as exciting because, ABC I don't know how much that's going to change. There's always going to be a group of people that don't like something, right? And those people always seem to be in the comments section of, the NWHL live stream or the PWHPA's latest broadcast. And, you're not going to change the minds of those people. It's a sad thing to say, but it's something that has been fought against forever. And that's something that women's hockey is fighting against right now and is slowly but surely turning it around.
That makes a lot of sense. Every time I watched an NWHL game, there's always that person who's like, well, why aren't they in the kitchen and making these rude comments, and it's like, okay, why are you here?
Yeah, we love those guys.
It's so annoying, but that makes a lot of sense. And you're right. I think a lot of those people's minds can't be changed. But what do you think can be done about it? What do you think the next steps are to kind of make women's hockey more popular and I don't know if equal pay will ever be a possibility, but at least get increased pay for women's hockey teams?
I think the steps are already starting to be made. I mean, we just saw Chicago, the Blackhawks, step forward as the third NHL team to directly back the PWHPA, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think we just need to continue seeing that. We need to see more teams in Canada, like the Montreal Canadiens, the Calgary Flames, the Vancouver Canucks, the Edmonton Oilers. I'd like to see the Ottawa Senators do something like that, but their owner is Eugene Melnyk, and that's a whole other issue. If we continue to see, I think at least original six teams, because we've got 3 out of the 6 original 6 NHL teams now backing the PWHPA. So if Detroit, Montreal, and Boston fall in suit of New York, Toronto, and Chicago, I think that is going to really start to get the ball rolling into something that we can see a WNHL similar to the WNBA. I think that's what I understand to be the ultimate goal of the PWHPA is to be the WNHL like the WNBA is. I think that's the best next step. No disrespect to the NWHL and all the work they've done. It's just not the same. And I don't want to say that the NWHL should fold or anything like that. I think the NWHL would be a great farm system for the WNHL, just like the AHL exists for the NHL.
Yeah, I think that would be great for them, especially, since the CWHL folded. I mean, they haven't really had that obviously not to degrade the NWHL, which is great, but yeah, we would like to see something bigger for sure. But kind of jumping off of that, I mean, there are a lot of people I've seen either talked to or seen on social media that just think women's hockey is not as good as men's, will never be as good as men's hockey. And they're saying that's because there's not as much, fighting. Obviously, there's no fighting in women's hockey. They say, oh, there's not, it's not as fast or not as violent. Do you think there should be changes made to the rules of women's hockey? And what is your opinion on that perspective? Do you think that women's hockey is actually not as fast, not as violent, and do you think that's why it's not as popular?
I think what you say is true in the sense of those are reasons that people cite for not wanting to or turn on the game or enjoy the game as much as men's hockey or whatever. Women's hockey does in general tend to be a little bit slower, and that's there is a speed factor in the simple fact of speed and acceleration and strength that men do possess genetically over women, and there's nothing wrong with that. But a change to the game that I would like to see is I would like to allow body contact in women's hockey. I've spoken to multiple players who've come through the Burlington Barracudas system because I've been with them for 4 years. And even going back to my time with the Southwest Wildcats, it tends to be that the girls and the young women that amass more penalty minutes end up being more sought after by bigger schools. And that's not necessarily because they're showing that they're aggressive, right? It depends on what kind of penalties they're taking, but they're being aggressive, right? And sometimes that is another reason that people will cite for not liking women's hockey or not watching it, right? Oh, they're not as aggressive. That's just not true. but I would like to see body contact allowed, and I would like to see it be grandfathered in, because I'll tell you this, I heard the reason body contact used to be allowed in women's hockey in the 90s. And apparently a group of some of the top people in women's hockey in the 90s decided to, in the early 90s, decided to get rid of it because too many women were getting hurt. And that tells me, well, people aren't being taught how to deliver and receive body checks then. And so that's where the grandfathering of body contact for me comes in, because back to what I was saying earlier, some of the best players that have been on the Barracudas were also the most physical, right? Because hockey's a physical game. And then if you just remove that physicality from it, there's again a large group of people who watch hockey, who love the physicality of hockey, and are immediately going to turn off women's hockey because it's not physical.
Yeah, for sure. And, I really like that you said that it should be like physicality and fighting should be allowed, because I completely agree with you. I know some people may not. I absolutely.
Well, I don't know about fighting.
I feel like
fighting's a little different, right? Because they got the full cages on, right?
Yeah, but I mean, like, at least some aspect of physicality, because
I've seen some scraps. There was some pretty high tempers in some games with the Barracudas in last season.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people like seeing that. But yeah, I completely agree with you on that, and I think that should be like more normalized, I guess, in women's hockey. And I think people would really like to see that. But now I want to go back to kind of your personal work that you're doing with the Barracudas. So you're doing a lot of great things. You're putting out features. I know you're starting a podcast, and that's really important, I think, for people to do to bring awareness to women's hockey teams. So I would want to ask you, what would be your biggest goal while working with the Burlington Barracudas?
Well, I think the goal for me, not just for the team, but for the league, is that this is one of the top, if not the top, junior women's hockey league in Canada, possibly North America. This is where a lot of the top talent gets drafted to D1 universities in the NCAA, and their talent develops into women that make it to Hockey Canada and play for the Olympics. Lauren Gable, Renata Fast, Erin Ambrose, a lot of the big names, Natalie Spooner, a lot of the big names on Team Canada right now that are from Ontario are from the PWHL. But this league, first of all, does not have any sort of social media presence at all. It has none whatsoever.
Yeah.
The accounts are there, but they don't do anything. And then it's simply not the equivalent to the OHL. And so the PWHL should be the equivalent of that. And you want to talk about equity or equality, whatever version of that you want to talk about. To me, that vision for me working with the Barracudas, and ultimately I'd love to work with the league, is to make the PWHL the OHL for girls.
That's a really great goal. And yeah, I agree with you. Like, I feel like every sports fan, hockey fan, has at least seen one or a couple OHL games. A lot of people don't know what the PWHL is. Like, so many people don't know, and it's surprising, but that's a great goal. And I think what you're doing is amazing. And I think more people should be doing that. But unfortunately, we are running short on time. But the last $1 million question that I want to ask you, which is really hard to predict, but do you think women's hockey will ever be as popular, or at least close to being as popular as men's hockey?
I think it can be, but I think it has to do with the exposure. It's going to take a lot of work for it to get there. It's going to take a lot of convincing of a lot of people who are set in their ways of boys and men's sports are more entertaining than women's, and therefore I'm going to spend my money on the men's. So many people are set in that way when it comes to business and advertising and money, which is why, you can make $5 million in the NHL and you can make only $5,000 in the NWHL. It's going to take a lot of work. And I don't know because women's hockey is so far behind in the development, guys in the NHL didn't make $5 million 20 years ago, right? We're talking like Wayne Gretzky made $5 million. So the NHL has grown exponentially in that sense in a long period of time, but the NHL has been established and been around for 100 years. the amount of work that went into the NHL has to go into women's hockey, and then almost double that to combat all of the extra crap, to be blunt, that's associated with being not men's sports. And it's unfortunate that they have to wade through the sewage, but so many movements have had to do the same thing.
Well, that's a very logical answer, and I would really love to see that, but I think you're completely right. Thank you so much for joining us today on Girls Got Game. It has been Jerred Bapty. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to do this.
The girls do got game. Don't forget it. Thanks, Elizabeth.
I think he brought up some interesting points and some aspects that I would never think of when talking about women's hockey. And I feel like it was really interesting to hear a male talk about women's hockey in such a positive way. And, you could really tell that he's been working with women's hockey and for women's hockey for a while now, because he did bring up some really good points. But I want to hear what your guys' thoughts are on the interview. Ella, do you want to start off?
I think for me, the thing that stood out was having an opinion from a male. Obviously, like Elizabeth said, this is our first male guest on the show, which is really exciting because I just think it's so important to have male allies in women's sports and just in general, because obviously you can't expect the women to just fight for their voice if they don't even have one, right? So I think it's really important that Jerred is on our side, basically, and I think his work that he's been doing with women's hockey is so awesome to see. But yeah, what do you guys think?
Where it was like boys don't get taught the existence of girls hockey. I feel like that was such a good thing, and like it kind of summed up all, like, not just women's hockey, like all of women's sports. And it's like because everyone grows up with men's sports, but because we're women, we're kind of like, oh, do women do this too? And then we have this sense of curiosity about, finding women doing it, and then you realize, oh, there's all these leagues and basically women are doing the same thing. But I feel like because they're boys, they don't have that same, it's not as like that same curiosity, because they are seeing themselves technically participating in these sports. So I guess that kind of sucks that, like, it's not that it's their fault, but like it's so much harder for men to watch women's sports because they don't know it growing up.
It really hit home for me too. I was literally going to bring that up, like, just as you did. But I think with women's sports, like, if you're a woman, you are kind of motivated to go out and find women's sports and watch it and support it and, like, see yourself in kind of those outlets. But if you're a guy and you're not surrounded by women's sports, you're only surrounded by men's sports, you're not, like, there's no motivation for you really to go out and find the women's sports. So it's in the dark almost, and, like, if I was a guy playing hockey, I wouldn't be like, oh, we're the woman, but I think that's so true, how men aren't taught about hockey, or boys aren't taught about hockey. I think that's where it really starts. It's not about men. It's not about teaching grown men. No, like, you have to start when they're young. You have to start from the grassroots, because if women are looking for those role models when they're kids, and they're looking for those adult women that are in, the NWHL or whatever, men aren't seeing those women role models. So I think things would be a lot different if the women's game was a lot more prominent and men could see it just casually, or boys could see it just casually, because then boys would potentially see women as their role models too. So then they would be more motivated and have that motivation to go and find the women's sports and support them as well.
Another thing that he brought up that I thought was really interesting was the fact that the PWHL is essentially the equivalent to the OHL for women's hockey. And I thought that was really interesting because I never even considered that. I never even thought about that until he said that. And, it's the same age group that can play. And, I grew up playing girls hockey. Everyone here knows this. But, like, especially I grew up with a PWHL team in my center. So, like, I was familiar with it. I have friends who've played PWHL both in Stony Creek and, like, in other centers. And I never even considered the fact that the PWHL is the equivalent for women as the OHL is for men, and that just goes to show, I think, how little it's talked about.
Yeah, I agree. Kennedy, kind of just going off of like how you mentioned that you played hockey. We all know that you played hockey growing up and everything, but you played hockey with guys and stuff, so you know what it's like to kind of play in a physical game. I found the conversation about like the physicality in women's hockey really interesting. So what's your take on women being physical in hockey? Like, fighting is very different from body checking, I think, but
Absolutely.
Yeah, where would you take that?
I definitely think there needs to be more contact allowed in women's hockey, especially like for like my generation or older. Like, we grew up, even maybe a couple years younger as well, like we grew up playing minor hockey without female role models, right? So we grew up like watching the NHL where there's body checking, there's fighting, whatever. You start to kind of adapt those like mannerisms, so to speak, and then you get in the game and you get penalties for it. And it's like, well, I watch, like, especially when you're younger, right? Like, when you start to understand it, you know you shouldn't do that. But when you're younger, you're like, well, I watched Sidney Crosby do this exact thing. That's like, it's not dirty, it's not bad, it's just a hockey play. And you get penalized for it, whereas the men don't. And I was kind of a player who likes to get under your skin and, you know, cause problems. And not necessarily like, I wouldn't say I'm a dirty player, but I definitely like to throw my body around and play physical. And it sucked when you know, made a hockey play that any man would get away with, and you're sitting in the penalty box for 2 minutes and you're putting your team at risk, right? Especially if you have a lead or if you're tied or something.
And obviously, I think it would be different if it's a co-ed team, like, you know, because biologically, on average, men are, you know, physically stronger than women, so that wouldn't be too fair. But I think if it's let's say in the WHL, if it's a women's team, I don't see a reason why there shouldn't be physicality. So that's a really good point. Sorry, Ella, I kind of interrupted you.
That's okay. I think as a wrap-up question, how would you guys say, for any males that are listening out there, what would you say your main tip is to be a good ally for women in sports?
I think just show support, like, and not just in private, like publicly show that you support not only women's hockey, but women in sport in general. Like, do what you can to get your word out there and to amplify voices of women in sport and female athletes.
But I think it's also about the stigma and everything. How I think a lot of guys are worried that if they show that they're into women's hockey, or if they have that interest and talk about it with their friends, they'll be thought of as like soft or something. And I think that stigma really has to change. I think just guys, and especially male broadcasters or just anyone, it's the little things that you say, you know, it's things that aren't necessarily offensive, they're not necessarily insults, they're just little things that put women's hockey below men's hockey, or women's sports in general below men's sports. And I think it all starts with guys not being afraid to show that they support it, and also not putting it below men's hockey.
I saw Sportsnet the other day posted their projections for the women's Olympic hockey team, and in the comments there were a ton of guys who were just like, oh, who cares? And it's like, if you don't care, that's fine, but like, just like, you don't have to say that.
Yeah, and also just like, one of the things that really confuses me is like, why do media outlets let that happen? Like, why do they let those comments even make it to the internet, you know? Like, I understand that it should be all about like freedom of speech and everything, but I think if there are those comments that are saying those things, I think a social media outlet or account has the right to say, I don't want this comment on my page. You know, and we could also start there. But I think that's also crossing lines that get a little bit more complicated.
Just don't understand why people who claim not to care enough to leave a comment.
It's
like, why?
I think I agree with what you're saying, Elizabeth. But I feel like there's a difference between just having an opinion and just being like hateful for no reason.
Yeah.
Like, the comments were brutal, right? And that's when I think it's okay to kind of censor that. But other than that, I mean, that's what social media is for, is to say what you want, right? I feel like that was such an interesting discussion with Jerred. And I love having the male perspective on female sports for a change. I think that was really cool to hear.
Any last thoughts from you guys about today's discussion and interview?
I just want to thank Elizabeth for bringing on our first male perspective in Girls Got Game. I think it's a really great step in the right direction and a really great way to set the tone for this season. So thanks, Liz.
No, it was so much fun doing it. I love that we're doing interviews now. next week for next episode. We will have another exciting interview for you guys and more exciting discussions. But thank you so much for listening for the to the first episode of season 5 of Girls Got Game. Thank you for supporting women's sports, and we will be back in the next episode. Thank you.
Go women's hockey.
Bye.